reasonable minds may differ, I would characterize my prior statements on the Souls series as cautiously negative, and that was by design. After all, I only played about 5 hours of Demon's Souls and found it to be an occasionally entertaining and rarely exceptional by-the-numbers dungeon crawler with a narrative that functions as the pine tree air freshener affixed to the rear window of the game in question. It's not that I hate the game, it's more that given my indifference, I viewed its sudden explosion to prominence in much the same light as a dog that walks in on its own or fucking a dirt devil. Sure, I get the appeal, but does it really feel that good to jam your dick into the only object that sucks harder than the PS4's game library? Before I even broach the subject of how well it functions, this is Dark Souls, so let's address the obvious. So is the game difficult? Well, for my money, not prohibitively so, and certainly not to the Hanna-Barbera degree suggested in all caps by the series' steadily proliferating fanboy contingent. Sure, I died enough times to pass as Tom Selleck's mustache, but I never experienced quite the same level of sublime, ego-demolishing frustration I experienced that fateful Sunday afternoon when a best friend and myself completed Double Dragon 3 at the ripe age of 9. In fact, what little frustration I did endure was more often in reaction to the malfunctioning game mechanics than forbidding difficulty. With Dark Souls 2, it's not really a question of if the game is difficult, it's a question of why the game is difficult. Look, I have no issue whatsoever falling victim to an ingeniously realized game level or a masterfully designed boss fight scenario where the only true adversary is my own lack of skill. It's when you consistently fall prey to less tangible adversaries like sluggish controls, hitboxes the consistency of Lou Reed's discography, and a cameraman with more nervous tics than a Baghdad meter maid that the pill becomes a chore to swallow. These controls are muddier than Louis Anderson's acid and all-you-can-eat Mongolian blowout. Unencumbered and playing a night class, there was still a nearly 2-second delay between when I depressed the run button and actually began the act of running, and that's actually on the shorter end of the ubiquitous input delay spectrum. Jabbing an enemy with a rapier, theoretically one of the faster swords in the game, produced a delay of nearly 1.5 seconds. In a game where enemies regularly dispense multi-hit flurries of murderous undead knife work with only fleeting pauses in between. We're not talking a bastard sword here, folks. It's a fucking rapier, doing rapier damage. It'd be a fucking treat if I could jab a bitch more than twice without collapsing into asthmatic fits. Your character has 3 categories devoted to magic and a stamina meter that goes empty faster than Hasselhoff's hit flask, so how about a fucking cardio stat? But I really have to stress that these irritants are just that, irritants, in a game that never once feels as difficult as I was assured it would be, slipshod controls or not. Not that I feel ripped off in the least. I can take or leave difficult games. Sometimes it works, other times it comes across as forced and gimmicky, and Dark Souls 2 features equal parts of both approaches. There are some gorgeous environments and unique enemy types employing unconventional defensive and offensive strategies, and I appreciate that. But on the latter front, it's hard for Souls fanboys to disprove the popular contention that this series is quote-unquote difficulty for difficulty's sake, especially when the achievement for dying the first time is entitled "This is Dark Souls." And permit me to feel the fucking obvious, if I may. What discernible purpose is served by recording my playtime in a game that even in offline mode lacks a fucking pause feature? What is that, for bragging rights? If I get up and make a tuna sandwich, it's logged as part of my playtime, and if you're raised in a house with no toilets, you don't brag about how many times you shat in the woods. I can't pause! And we all saw how well that worked out for Resident Evil 6. Dark Souls 2's multiplayer is Dark Souls multiplayer. It's player killer oriented, and within that context, it's actually fairly standard PK fare. Some of the upgrades, like a ring that disguises what weapon your character is holding in multiplayer, could probably do with a bit of fine-tuning for balance purposes. But the good news is that the adjustments to this game's online balance issues are taking place motherfucking perpetually, so by the time I complain about something pertaining to multiplayer, there's a good chance it'll be holding a rip-roaring irrelevance party along with MySpace and the music of Chris Brown. But what irks me where Dark Souls 2 is concerned are the double standards. Oh, what's that? Thief 4 mapped all the attacks to the shoulder and trigger buttons? Unplayable abortion! Carbamidos Montreal! Bake them a cyanide souffle! Oh, but From Software makes the exact same mistake in a game predicated on ceaseless combat, no less, and it's Christ come again regardless. And what about the story? When Final Fantasy XIII relegated 90% of its narrative to a glossary the size of Peter Molyneux's Pretense, off to the game design guillotine they went. But Dark Souls 2 deliberately engineers their pseudo-story to dart from view until the precise moment you engage an NPC, and willfully subject yourself to some vapid shithead with an inscrutable accent bludgeoning you to death with a wooden end of the acting stick. Well, fuck. Must be time to compare it to the Dark Project. No, motherfucker. None of the most vivid Chinese brown heroin-fueled hallucination is this game's lore, story, or style of emergent narrative worthy of being mentioned in the same breath, reality, or motherfucking hemisphere as the Dark Project. That isn't to say a somewhat intriguing game world doesn't peek through the Venetian blinds on the odd occasion, but voice actors I can only assume were hired from a big comfy couch audition put a quick and decisive stop to any connection I may have conceivably felt with it. Readables do their damnedest to pick up the slack, but there's a lot of slack to pick the fuck up, and a handful of notes lack the requisite muscle for the job. Where the game emerges from the mire of its own narrative shortcomings, however, is in the awe-inspiring varieties of character and class customization options, and an Olympian arsenal of wildly divergent weapons and armor types, each with its own distinct look, feel, and statistical attributes. The depth of simulation on that front is second to none, at least in a contemporary gaming market that hasn't embraced a pure RPG dungeon crawler since the days of Ultima Goddamn Underworld, and delivers the precise manner of nuance and subtext lacking in virtually every other aspect of the game. You know, Dark Souls 2 is a bizarre dichotomy for me because in many ways I didn't personally care for it, yet I can honestly say that despite the negligible technical flaws, and only occasionally intriguing game world, and the latent imprecision of the control scheme, whether intentional or not, I would recommend this game, at least if you're looking for a solid RPG dungeon crawler that you will cast appalling quantities of your time into, and that playtime only doubles with the return of a long-believed dead gaming trope by the name of New Game Plus. Despite my grievances, and they are valid, I'm not sure if you've poked your head up from the developmental mores recently, but these types of games aren't exactly growing on fucking trees these days. I'll take a somewhat sloppy and imprecise plunge into a dungeon filled with pissed-off skeletons over a first-person modern military incursion to fucking Brownistan any day. It ain't perfect, and maybe it doesn't want to be. Welcome to my world, motherfuckers. I'm RazörFist. God fucking speed.